If you want to be more effective in your work and in your life, and you'd like to have more confidence that you're meeting your intentions, this is where it begins. Welcome to Do Busy Right, helping you organize your information and manage your attention so that they work for you, not against you. We educate you and encourage you by discussing ways to be more effective, not more exhausted. Let's do busy right. In this episode, I'll try to talk about the origin story of Attention Compass, the way that I came to understand this problem and the way that I came to understand the solution to the problem, and then some about where the business is, where the business is going, some about bigger picture philosophical stuff. I think some conversation about this will inform you in terms of what you can expect to hear on the podcast. And it's a little bit about me, in case you're curious what kind of thinking I do. It may be interesting for you to know that. But anyway, here we are, and we'll talk about this for a little while and end, I think, with some philosophical things that will tell you what's going to go on with this podcast and the kinds of things that I think about. That's kind of why I decided to put it together. I guess I'll start with some broad generic background up through about 2006. My career has been in IT management, that is, managing groups of software developers. And so I've always been engaged and involved in the technology, in personal computing, in how do we make computers useful to people. Some hardware, not a ton, but you can't have been a computer user when I was, which is the late 80s, without understanding, where the case ended and the computer began, so to speak. But been involved in that. I've always been intrigued by the notion of how businesses work, how teams work, how processes work, all these sorts of things. My undergraduate was from UAB, and that happened in about 92, and it was a specialization in the management of technology projects, as I recall. So that kind of puts you in where I was trying to be in terms of the kinds of things I was interested in helping people with. In the 2000s, I had been working for the same company, a large company in Birmingham, Alabama, for several years, managing a team of 10 to 12 to even at one point, I think it was 13 or 14 programmers that were developing software on the PC for this large corporation. While I was learning to manage that team, it wasn't my first management job, but I'm always trying to learn. So I was learning to manage that team. I was studying productivity. Now, my study of productivity goes all the way back to Stephen Covey and his release of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People in the late 80s. And so I had read that and began to understand ways to be productive and try to apply those. I had spent a fair amount of time learning and using a day timer. For those of you that may be aware of that far back, we were using paper to try and manage our stuff. And everybody had a day timer, and it was a little book with pages that you put in. And so I was studying how to use these tools and how to best manage my resources such that I could have a useful career, be a good manager of people. I've always taken the management responsibility very seriously. I wanted to understand how technology worked into this. I understood the capabilities of personal computing and thought that that could make a big difference in how we managed our work and how we managed our lives. So all that's in there, that productivity piece. But I had become a corporate guy. I was fairly certain that that job with that company would be an opportunity just to stay on a career path within the company and that I would just continue to move along there. And this was a time when that was becoming really less and less an option, is to work for the same company for 3 decades or whatever it was. But I'm in corporate management, and so I'm thinking about these problems. I'm in project management because I'm in software development. I had learned formal project management training in a previous job that I had in the 90s, and applied that to software development in order to try to control the process and try to make sure that projects worked according to plan and that projects were run efficiently in terms of dollars and everybody's time. And so project management was a piece in there. And then, of course, by 2006, David Allen had released Getting Things Done, and I had read that and implemented the GTD methodology in my own work and trying to utilize it to self-manage so that I can then help other people manage their work. And that was always the philosophy I had as a manager, as a coach, somebody who tries to help productivity, all these kinds of ideas. So I had been using GTD. Also, by this time, the PC had overtaken the paper journal in terms of the day timer as the tool to manage your stuff. Email, Outlook calendar, these kinds of pieces were where we went to look for ways to keep task lists, ways to keep a calendar organized, ways to have information and disseminate information that was already in place there in 2006. We had mobile phone, of course, in 2006. It wasn't quite as ubiquitous as it is now, but we used it just basically as a communication device. So we went through from having a desk phone to, if you had a certain kind of job, you had a pager, which was a one-way communication device, of course. And in order to make the pager work, you had to have access to a phone. So that's how we got to mobile phones. And then the mobile phone eradicated the need for the pager because you just gave people your phone number. At this point, 2006, I still had a landline at my home and still had a landline to my desk at my office. So we've replaced the daytime, but we're still trying to figure out how to do GTD in Outlook, in computer world. In 2006, storage was a challenge. Scanning, photographs, all those sorts of things that we take for granted now were not terribly common in terms of business tools. We weren't sure in 2006, we weren't sure how to use mobile technology, even at the level that it was. We weren't sure how to use it in order to help us with our own productivity. Other than if you have a mobile phone, you can take a call when you're in the car. And that was kind of the big deal in productivity. But I knew because of my background in computers and software development that the computer could help us manage information. It was just a question of how to do it. And so the technology is evolving now. And I'm trying to figure out how to do getting things done in an Outlook shaped world. In 2005, I entered an executive MBA program and finished that in 2006. So now I'm a business guy. I'm an MBA in a corporate position dealing with IT and software and trying to extend the management game and figure out how best to make a team effective in the software development world and how best to make effective use of my own time and attention in order to help the team the best. And also in order to not have to work 60 and 65-hour weeks. In the software biz in 2006, it was pretty go, go, go. We made commitments and we tried to keep them. And there was still a little bit of glamour left in the overnight death march project. We didn't like it, but there was still a little bit of that going on. That was the challenge. So here we are in 2006, around this time, not exactly 2007, but around this time, 2006, 2007, 2008, a handful of things happened that became really important things in retrospect. The first is that the iPhone released. The iPhone release really didn't immediately alter the world. It took us a while to figure out what the release of the iPhone meant. but it was a device that you could actually do computing on. So instead of being a mobile phone, the iPhone was a mobile computing device, where prior to that, everything you did on the phone was really basically talk. And text came into play, but that was just sort of a substitute when you didn't want to talk. And so now we're working out into this space where we've got BlackBerries and personal digital assistants, and then we've got the iPhone release and these sorts of things. So now we're having mobile computing and the expectation that this handheld device can do many of the things that a desktop computer could do. So the iPhone released about this time. Dropbox happened. Dropbox was, to my mind, kind of the first sharing protocol for information between computers. We had certainly gone from the thinking of why would anybody ever need a personal computer to, okay, I've got one at work, to, okay, well, now I've also got one at home. And now we've got this one in our pockets. And so the notion of having information in more than one place is getting to be important. We had gone through the Napster phase, and we knew that we could put information out there and multiple people could download it. But then Dropbox was my first exposure to this kind of synchronized world of a system that moved things around and kept multiple computers in sync with the same set of data. So Dropbox is the second one. Facebook is the third one. During this time, the Facebook, of course, was released. It created and released well before this time, but this was the time where it began to be the dominant social platform and overtook MySpace. MySpace, for me at the time, was a little bit odd. I couldn't imagine that I needed an online persona. My real world persona was plenty of trouble for me to keep up with. And so all these things are happening, but you know, I'm in MBA school now, and I'm beginning to keep track, and I'm reading the Wall Street Journal and the Harvard Business Review, and I'm keeping track of these things that are happening. So Facebook kind of surpassed MySpace into the dominant social platform. It's not that they're the same thing, but this is now the advent of social computing, social media, in terms of it being used by common people, the majority of folks. These three things happened around the same time. So the iPhone release, so now we've got mobile computing rather than just a mobile phone. Dropbox happened, so we've got information that can live on multiple computers at the same time. And we've got social media happening, and the social computing aspect is coming into play now versus kind of solo computing. Also, you may recall in this same time period, around 2008, we had a thing called the Great Recession, which threw everything up into the air, and investment changed and inflation changed and all kinds of things happened. So the next phase of what I did is really the Ph.D. I went into Ph.D. school trying to figure out, I had a pretty good idea that I would enjoy an academic career. And so I took Ph.D. school trying to figure out what that looked like and where I would do it. My discipline in the Ph.D. world was management information systems, my primary discipline. And so we were studying the use of computing in business and how information systems could be used to help businesses outcompete in the marketplace. I went in with the notion of trying to understand, why is it that IT projects are such colossal failures? The success rate of IT projects at the time, and I'm pretty sure it hasn't changed much since then, the success rate was about 1 out of 3 projects was considered a success, and 2 out of 3 were considered failures. And so I went in there into the PhD beginning to try to understand how all these things worked. PhD was lots of fun. I was very pleased to be accepted into a PhD program and figuring out what it took to be an academic and a scholar and all these sorts of things. The MBA studies taught me that I would enjoy academic pursuits, and that's one of the reasons why I started doing the PhD work, is because I felt confident that an academic career would be something that I would enjoy and potentially be good at. In Ph.D. school, you may know that it's a full-time thing and that they do pay you. The problem is they don't pay you very much. And I took a 75 or 80% pay cut from the corporate world to go back into academia. And at the time, my wife is staying home with our two kids that are in the 8, 9, 10-year-old range. They pay you, but they don't pay you much, and it certainly wasn't enough to keep up with my family's needs. And so in addition to doing the PhD work, I took on IT projects. Fortunately, I was enough of an experienced IT project manager that I could find my way through some projects here and there and took those on in order to put some food on the table and pay the mortgage and keep the tax man away. So we did that for several years. The entire time I was in the PhD program was finding projects, doing projects, finding the next project, doing the next project. So there are lots of different projects going on. And I'm explaining for you the PhD, the mental state that I was in at the time, because these are the years in which the need for attention compass in my life, and thus the creation of the attention compass, really began to happen, was at this point. So I've got lots of different projects going on. The PhD work itself consists of 2 years of coursework, of taking classes. And just like MBA school classes, just like graduate school classes, you sit in a classroom, you have exams, you have papers, all these different things are going on. Phase 2 of the PhD is the writing of the dissertation. And those two can have some overlap, although oftentimes they don't have a ton. So in addition to having project work, I had classwork. And you remember back to your college days where you had 4 or 5 classes per semester. We had 4 per semester, and the professors don't talk to each other, and there's lots of different assignments going around, lots of different discrete work tasks to keep track of, both short-term and long-term, across 4 disjointed pieces of effort. So keeping track of all of those tasks was a big part of my life here. And then even out into the research part of the PhD. So research has a lot to do with understanding the state of the academic discipline that you're studying. And this happens through academic journal articles. At the time, academic journals were just beginning to ease out into electronic distribution. We had both. Now they're fully into electronic distribution, and it's very difficult, I think, now to find a current copy of a paper journal, because all that printing and paper is very expensive. But the electronic nature of the documents is only part of the challenge of managing PhD level information. These are 30 to maybe 35-page academic articles, and they're very dense. And each article draws a conclusion. Each article has some premises and a hypothesis that it works on. Each article is science and is a piece of knowledge that may or may not be needed in my work. The challenge of this is over 3 or 4 years of intensive research study, I probably read 1,000 of these journal articles, so thousands of pages of information. And while I'm quite a good reader, reading academic papers is not trivial. So it takes 45 minutes to an hour to read this 30 pages of information because it's very dense. It's very closely reasoned. It's trying to make a point. So while you're reading it, you have to decide whether that point is well made or poorly made. I say all this to say keeping up with the information in journal articles pretty much became a driving obsession. We barely had time to read them once, much less read them again, because we failed to capture the information that we needed out of them the first time. A lot of research is recognizing that person X said thing Y in press and that a set of peers agreed that this was a valid conclusion. So you now use that as evidence to support some other point. So you have to be pretty precise about what you're referencing. when you're doing this. And so you have to understand what these papers are and what they say and what they don't say. So now I've told you a little bit about the mental environment. And the mental environment is lots of things to track, lots of different taskings, lots of different classwork, lots of different assignments, lots of different information. And then the physical environment also played a part. And the physical environment was such that I was at the University of Alabama, which is a large semi-rural campus measured in square miles. And so a lot of classes are in different places and it's very, very spread out. The reason I bring this up is to say I had the opportunity to have at one point 4 different offices that I had access to. So depending on which part of campus I needed to be on that day, I had an office nearby and didn't have to spend an inordinate amount of time traveling back and forth. The challenge, that was great, but the challenge of that is that each one of those offices had its own computer in it. And I had a laptop. A laptop at the time was fairly small. Keyboards were not good. They're still not good, if you ask me. And the ability to do really great computer work on a laptop, in my opinion, is about 70% of the ability to do it on a desktop with full-size monitors. We're now into the 2 monitor or more generation pointing devices. Ergonomics are better. So I always wanted to be sitting at a desk to do the work that I needed to do and not have to rely on my laptop. That meant that if I was going to sit down at a full-size keyboard with a mouse and monitors and the kinds of arrangements that I thought were best for my productivity, is that these computers then had to have all the information that I needed at the same time. So there's lots of places to work. And I enjoyed that, and that was useful from a productivity standpoint. Here we are. I'm in this world of lots of things to track, lots of different irons in the fire, so to speak, from a work, from a getting paid perspective and from a class perspective. Lots of challenging information to store and lots of places to work from, lots of chairs to sit in. So there were 2 really burning questions on my mind at all times during this part of my life. One is, where's my stuff? And by stuff, I mean this information that I need in order to be able to manage the projects that I was dealing with. In addition to having multiple offices, for the first time in my career, I had multiple email addresses. And that was one of the challenges. So this challenge of where's my stuff? How do I find my stuff? How is my stuff going to be there when I need it? And that became a challenging question because the technology was not quite then, and I'll talk about this in just a minute, was not quite then as useful as it is now for cloud-based or synchronized information sharing. So where's my stuff was a huge challenge. The other huge challenge was, what's my task? And I'll explain some about the underlying thinking that goes on. What do I need to be doing next? What's the next thing on my plate? Is it schoolwork? Do I need to be studying for a test? Do I need to be helping an IT project along? Do I need to be doing research and reading academic papers, preparation for my own dissertation? So this constant jumble of things that could be done and trying to sort through and pick out the best one, the right one, if you will, was a challenge. You can imagine at this point I was simply overwhelmed. And so was my GTD methodology. It was just a constant stream of things. And I'm feeling this stress around, am I getting everything done? Am I touching everything correctly? Am I going to get fired from one of my IT projects because I've overlooked something? Am I making sufficient progress on my dissertation? Am I making the grades that I need to make in my classes? All these questions are out there floating around. And I'm pretty well overwhelmed. So now we're into about 2010, 11, 12, this time frame. So I'm facing these problems and I'm struggling around trying to find a solution to this set of problems that I have in this complex environment, a physically complex environment, informationally complex environment. From a project standpoint, it was complex. So looking back on it, there are some big picture assumptions that were true about my work and life at that time that may be true about your work and life now to some greater or lesser degree. So these constraints have a lot to do with how I felt the environment compelled me to respond, or ways in which I needed to overcome my environment at the time. So one of the things that really was happening at the time was this transition from paper journals to electronic journals. And I'm talking about academic journals, of course. So now our articles are in PDFs and they're not in books. And that allowed me to start thinking about, okay, how can I get rid of paper? Notions around the paperless office had been floating in the world for a while now. You don't have to have email long before you figure out that, hey, maybe I don't need a whole bunch of paper in my world. The notion of paper and its various uses was also prevalent in my mind because of the GTD methodology that I was using at the time. And the GTD book focused a lot on pieces of paper. And I'm looking at my world, and if I'm going to keep pieces of paper moving, then I've got to have a lot of paper. And I'm going from office to office to office. I'm working at home. I'm working in different parts of campus. How am I going to carry all this paper around with me? How am I going to carry all of the academic articles I might need as these 30-page printouts that get heavy beyond, about 20 of them? How am I going to keep them with me? So thinking about what to do with the paper and how it's both inflexible and cumbersome as we try to use it. Another interesting aspect of my life at this point is that I don't have a single boss telling me what to do. I've got people in the university who were trying to help me move me along in the Ph.D. process. That is not so much a boss-employee relationship as it is a mentor-student, teacher-student kind of relationship. Things get suggested, but in terms of, you're going to do this or we're going to kick you out of school, that's not really a part of the PhD program. As long as you make the grades, you're in there. And that's the thing about maybe the university system that makes it different from the business world. If your grades are good, it's really hard to mess up enough that you get thrown out of college, as we all know. But I didn't have a boss, so I had multiple projects with multiple companies, so I was a consultant there. And my subject matter teachers had control over what they could tell me to do to prepare for their course. But beyond that, they really were not terribly interested in kind of the overall process. They figured out somebody else was trying to do that. So I don't have a single boss telling me what to do. I don't have a single set of responsibilities with a common theme. I'm out in the project management world. I'm out in the business world. I'm out in the academic world. And so there's not one person or entity I can go to that say, no. This is your priority for this week. This one's more important than that one. Now, looking back on it, maybe a lot of people don't have that in their lives. At the time, that was a thing for entrepreneurs and CEOs, to not have anybody telling them what to do. And now it's a lot more common, I think, and we'll get into some of that when we get into philosophy here at the end of this episode. But don't have a boss to tell me what to do. I've got to deal with a lot of regular information, business level, IT project information. And those of you in the IT project world understand what that is, but it's not dissimilar from any sort of managerial position. I've got lots of emails coming at me with questions. I've got lots of people that want to have my opinion on something. I've got lots of meetings to attend. So just white collar job information, but there's a fair amount of it. Just because I wasn't full time, the proportion of information didn't flow exactly with the fact that I wasn't full time. I felt like I had a full time load of information or more at sort of a part time utilization rate. So I'm dealing with all of this regular information. And then I'm also dealing with this complex, unstructured academic information, this detailed but unstructured academic information. So taking a 30-page paper and summarizing it down into what does it mean? How do I organize this paper so that I can find it again when I need it? Because we didn't have time to read everything we needed to read the first time. We sure didn't have time to read it a second time. And something that was lost was really lost. Maybe you've had this experience of having a shelf full of books, and you know that in one of those books, there's a piece of information that you can't quite recall. You need to go back to the correct book to find that piece of information, and you don't know which book it is. Well, that can be a very similar challenge in managing academic papers. I've read 30 papers in the last 2 weeks. And one of them said a fact that I need now to quote in my own work. So which one of those was it? And how do you track that information? So a big challenge in the information management world, because both of the volume of information that I'm trying to deal with, but also the complexity and nature of that information. That's a challenge at the same time. I'm also, for reasons that I'm still not entirely clear on, also very interested in the brain. I guess it goes back to this notion of living the life of the mind as an academic and recognizing that I really was in the knowledge creation field. And so some thinking about how do our brains work? How do our brains keep track of tasks? How do our brains give us attention? How do our brains give us inspiration? How do we do problem solving? The reason for particularly the problem solving is I taught programming to kids that were not computer science geeks. So I taught programming to business school students. And at the end of the day, programming is a problem solving process. It's much more like shop class than it is like history class. In history class, you read the book, you memorize the book, you answer the questions correctly, write a good paper, you're pretty much off and running. In shop class, you actually have to manipulate things and come up with solutions, and you deal with things in the physical world. And programming really leans that direction. You're not dealing with physical things in the world, but you do have to solve a problem, and you have to solve it effectively. So understanding problem solving as a way to teach it to my students was part of this background of studying the psychology, studying the neuroscience of our brains working. Now, I did not study that at the graduate studies level. I did popular press just like everybody else. But my level of scholarship was going up, even in stuff that was not my Ph.D. topic. So I'm studying how do our brains work in this world. So here's this big pile of things that together are posing a problem for me in a situation that I've got to deal with. So this whole business of moving from paper to electronic documents was a piece. I don't have anybody to say, no, Larry, do this, don't do that. So I've got to figure all that out by myself across multiple different, seemingly disconnected projects. The only thing that an IT project and my PhD work had in common was the fact that I was doing them. So I don't have a boss telling me what to do, got to figure that out. So dealing with the regular information of a white collar kind of management job, and many of you know what that looks like, and that's emails and meeting notes and attending meetings and calendar stuff and all that regular information, plus dealing with this complex and unstructured academic information, all the while recognizing that it was my management of information that was going to make the difference in my success or failure as a PhD student. Now, at this point, I began to cobble together some bits and pieces. Some of it was accidental. A lot of it was intentional. Some of it was information that I had learned previously. Others of it was information that I researched and found out. But the crux of the situation is I had relied and depended on the GTD methodology, and now it was getting a real stress test. And it was beginning to fail for any number of potential reasons. And when I say fail, I don't mean it broke. I mean, it just began to be overly cumbersome because of the huge volume of things I was having to deal with. It's a great methodology, and it still forms the core of what I teach today as attention compass. It is the core of, I think, the way that knowledge workers have to manage themselves. And I'll get into that a little bit more later in this episode. But at the time, at least, GTD was paper. And there really only was beginning to be a way to effectively move away from paper. And so how then do we merge these two systems? So one piece of this light that dawned is that Evernote went mainstream at about this time, meaning mainstream for me means I have an account. And I was out looking at ways to manage. At the time, I just thought of it as ways to synchronize my information across multiple platforms. And I had tried thumb drives and removable hard drives, and I had tried docking stations for my laptop, and I had tried all these different things. And none was a completely satisfactory solution. They were all either too expensive or too cumbersome, or I'd lose my thumb drive. And so I'm still trying to figure out this whole synchronization problem. And then I found out about Evernote and its ability to keep a local copy of all your information plus synchronize to multiple machines and keep local copies of it there. And I thought that the killer use case for Evernote was the fact that it could do all this, sort of like Dropbox with more flexibility in some ways. So I'm beginning to understand what Evernote does. Another ray of light that began to dawn was this project management background that I had. So I'm understanding how complex sequences of tasks are done, at least the Project Management Institute's view of how that's done. And that's because I had studied that and applied it in all these software development projects. So I was able to take a project management view of things like my dissertation and say, okay, well, here's how we put all this out. Here's how we determine the sequence and order of tasks. I knew Gantt charts. I could use Microsoft Project, for example, pretty effectively and put my dissertation work in there as a project. So not only did I have enough knowledge to attempt to apply this tool to my work, but I also had enough experience to see when it wasn't going to work and situations where it really didn't apply. I was a good user of that formal project management methodology. That methodology's failure in my environment could not be attributed to a lack of my ability to understand the framework. I had applied it successfully in other areas. It was then only attributable to the fact that it didn't fit. Some assumptions were made within the project management framework that didn't apply in the world that I was in now. And I tried to dig down into part of this as my Ph.D. research, which didn't work out for academic reasons that I won't go into right now. But that project management background was there, and I was understanding this from a project manager's perspective. Another ray of light in this world is I'm a PhD level student of information management. Management information systems is all about how does an organization utilize information such that the information is more valuable to the organization, such that that information is not wasted or misused in the organization. And so I'm able to take that perspective and look at the information management component of what I've got to deal with. It's very interesting in that information management, even at the PhD level, and even as important as information management is to PhD students, it's really not taught at that level, just like it's not taught in high school, it's not taught in college, it's not taught in business school, it's also not taught in graduate school. And I still fail to understand why personal information management is not a core part of some curriculum at the late high school or freshman college level. But that's a soapbox that I won't get on for right now. But I understood information management, knew how to study it because of my academic track. All of these things begin to flow together and all these ideas begin to happen. And I started keeping my own personal information management. I started keeping that in Evernote. When I say keeping it, I mean everything. So everything flowed into Evernote at first so that I could synchronize it to the multiple locations that I needed to be in. Only later did it become clear that there were certain features of Evernote that allowed a specific style of information management to be used when using Evernote. And this is back to this student of information management piece. So Evernote and its features and functionality became a core part of my personal management methodology, which at this point did not have a name. I've gone back to some documents where in about 2013, 2014, I'm talking about the productivity project in my own life. And I'm talking about, okay, well, how do I implement tools to be productive? I was developing the system that I would later name the attention compass, but I was developing it just for myself. And so these rays of light are beginning to coalesce, and I'm beginning to be able to feel comfortable that I'm dealing with the stuff that I need to deal with. And that lowered my level of stress. And I will say that there was a fair amount of response from people that knew me well, and they would watch what I was doing, particularly on these IT projects. And so I would have people that I'm working with in a part-time capacity say, how do you manage all this stuff? And I would say, well, I do this and that and the other thing. Here's this tool called Evernote. Here's how you use it and that sort of thing. And they were very interested. And so I would give them tips and I would say, hey, show me what you're doing. And I would show them what I'm doing. It became obvious that this was not just a point solution to a problem that Larry had, but it's a solution with general global applicability to knowledge work kinds of tasks or knowledge work kinds of roles or knowledge work kinds of jobs, because it was effective for other people as well as being effective for me. I'm doing various things and working various IT projects and contracts. And in 2017, I launched my own business. I did it because enough people had found value in what I had now named the attention compass that I felt it was important to have a business vehicle where I could deliver it to them. It was interesting because launching it as a business and launching it instead of a hobby, launching it as something that I do for part of my living as compared to something that I do just because I'm a nice guy, really interesting and got me out into the entrepreneurial space of forming businesses and how do you do marketing and how do you identify target audience, all these different sorts of things. But one of my core challenges was, okay, how do I explain all of this attention compass stuff to people? What's the mechanism by which I explain it? Well, I had been having meetings with people and I would say, okay, well, let's have a meeting and you show me what you're doing and I'll show you some about how this works. Ooh, let's have a meeting and I'll help you install Evernote and show you some about how Evernote works and how I think it's going to help you do this part of your work. Oh, let's have a meeting. Let's have a meeting. And that over time got routine enough that I put together some sort of syllabus, some sort of organization of the way these meetings would flow. And I would say, okay, on the first meeting, we're going to talk about X, Y, and Z. And on the second meeting, we're going to talk about A, B, and C. And I was able to put that down. So I'm trying to explain this to people. And it's very interesting because it's at this point that I realize nobody's talking about this stuff. Everybody's talking about productivity. And a lot of people are talking about productivity tools, but nobody's really talking about it at the fundamental level that it needs to be talked about. And I'm going to get into that a little bit towards the end when we start talking a little bit more about philosophy. So I've got coaching as a delivery mechanism, in part because people can only take on so much information at once, and in part because I'm trying to help people build new work habits with the attention compass. I named it the attention compass because the focus is on managing our attention rather than on managing our time. And I think this is still a component of confusion in the productivity world. I think people are trying to help us manage our time, and our time is not really something that we have enough control over that we could say, hey, I'm managing it. But I think our attention is something that we have enough control over. The attention compass signals a focus on managing attention. Now I'm an entrepreneur. I'm delivering value through helping people, and I'm getting paid based on that value. Helping people to get on top of their information, helping people to understand that a to-do is just a specific type of information. It's a specific flavor, if you will, of information. We get so much of our tasking through electronic media, particularly email, that when we store that email information, that becomes an indication that we need to do a task. All of this helps people be more effective, certainly, but it also helps people reduce the stress of being a knowledge worker, reduce the stress of not being managed as thoroughly as we once were, reduce the stress of having a meaningful task-filled life and a profitable task-filled job. When we begin to get control of our information and thus our tasks and thus our attention and therefore our time, then this stress really drops dramatically. And this is one of the ways that this system helps people. I think of it as a life management system, although I refuse to call myself a life coach. And I think people are really into one of two camps. There's people out there who don't investigate this stuff very thoroughly at all. I don't think you're probably one of those people, because you probably wouldn't have gotten this far into this episode of this podcast if you were. But there's another extreme, and that's people who are furiously trying to solve the problem. We have people who jump from system to system, who adopt a tip or a trick for 3 days only to lose track of it because they haven't built a habit. So the science of getting people to the point where they manage their information, tasks, and attention well is still an evolving science. I think that Attention Compass, at least, is designed to be a complete system to manage all of the stuff. It's not tips and tricks. It's habits and workflows. It's not do whatever you want. It's here's this tool. I'm not a life coach. I'm a work coach, which means my value is that I understand this activity very well, and I can explain to you the best tools and the best processes for you to be able to do it. I'm much more like a tennis coach or a golf coach in that I say, here's the right way to ... In golf, it's swing the club. In tennis, it's swing the racket. In knowledge work, it's manage the information. Here's the right way to manage the information. Here's the right way to use a calendar. So I'm a work coach, and that's what I do, is help people get this figured out. If that resonates with you, love to hear from you. I'm not hard to find. You can hit me at larry@dobusywright.com, or I'm readily findable on LinkedIn. Now, I certainly don't want to take all the credit for figuring this stuff out. A lot of people helped. David Allen, Stephen Covey, all those folks helped out. There's a system called The Secret Weapon that happened in about 2014, and I still don't know who published that. But if you know those people, give them my thanks. So we've taken all these pieces and added in a sprinkling of my own experience and knowledge, and now it's all put together. And there is the attention compass as a system, and I can reliably put that system in your hands, and you will reliably improve your perception of your own productivity by 20 to 30%. 1 day a week of productivity is what my clients say they get back. So that's all packaged up and put together. And now we got to think for just a couple of minutes about what does it mean? What big picture problems are we addressing? How do you classify this attention compass thing? And I've thought of a couple of ways to do it. If you're familiar with Peter Drucker, I quote him a lot. Well, I quote him a lot whether you're familiar with him or not. If you've heard the podcast, you probably heard me mention him. Peter Drucker in the 1950s and 1960s talked about knowledge work as an emerging form of human endeavor and as one that we weren't terribly well prepared to deal with. Knowledge work is different than what Drucker refers to as manual labor. And his point is that we got very good at managing manual labor. Manual labor productivity went up by 20-fold or 50-fold or some number like that through the 1900s. And he ascribes the prosperity of the Western world to that improvement in manual worker productivity. And Drucker's question for us is, okay, now we're moving into knowledge work. What tools do we need to put in place to help knowledge workers be more productive, like we help the manual workers be more productive? And Drucker sees this as the next phase of economic growth. And thus, if we're going to continue to see the high levels of growth that we've experienced for the last 100 years, that we need to get to solving this problem for knowledge workers. I would say that understanding the knowledge worker management problem has really informed my work in developing the attention compass as a solution. Knowledge workers use information as their raw material. They also use it as their output, and their brain is their productive asset. Some people would say their knowledge is their productive asset. I don't make that distinction, but a knowledge worker has information, uses a brain to change that information, produces new information or altered information or summarized information out into the world, and gets paid based on it. A physician gets paid largely based on their ability to diagnose your problem. Knowledge work. An author gets paid primarily because they put words together in certain ways that other people don't. Knowledge work. So as we're addressing this knowledge work management challenge that Drucker posed now 50, 60 years ago, but that still shows no signs of being solved, I think attention compass, attention management philosophy could be a big part of how we help knowledge workers manage, how knowledge workers become more productive, because information management has got to be a key to knowledge worker productivity, just like information management was a key to my work as a Ph.D. student. I think knowledge workers waste a lot of time looking for the information that they need. Even if they already have acquired that knowledge, oftentimes they have to go back and look for it again, if you see what I'm saying. And this goes back to trying to have an academic journal article and saying, oh, well, I didn't read it well enough the first time. I'm going to have to go back and read it again. And I don't have time to do that. So this ability to capture information and organize it properly so that it comes back up when we need it is a big piece of attention compass, and it's a big piece of the work of knowledge workers. So one area in which I think philosophically we're moving forward with the attention compass is in helping knowledge workers manage their work. Another area that is emerging is the notion of personal information management. We are now in a position and have the tools and have the need to manage our own information set fairly carefully. We need to become the librarians of our lives. I'm familiar with the work of William Jones, who, as far as I know, is at the University of Washington, and he's a leading voice in this personal information management field. I think that as we continue to move towards a medialess world, by medialess, I mean paper books, I mean record albums, I mean printed photos. I think that we're going to need to get better and better and better at personal information management. I think our personal information management methodologies are still holdovers from a world where information can be controlled by the media that it's delivered on. And now we're getting away from that. So our ability to manage personal information, our ability to manage our own health information, our ability to manage our own financial information, our ability to manage usernames and passwords, something as basic to the information economy as that, I think needs to be solidified, needs to be stronger. And I think Attention Compass helps do that. It puts us in a position where we can better manage our own stuff, whether that be work stuff or life stuff, or as I believe, my stuff, which transcends both work and life. I would say the third thing that is going to help us understand is this notion of group information management. Group information management is in your organization or in your team at work or in your company. You have multiple people and they need to have a common set of information that they understand. How do we keep that information? How do we store that information in such a way that we're not wasting a bunch of time with people trying to find it? I think the study of personal information management really informs the study of group information management. And there are specific ways that I think those two things interact. As an example, I think before group information management can happen effectively, each member of the group needs to be outstanding at personal information management. I think if that second thing is true, then the group information management problem pretty much solves itself. If we're good at managing our personal information, then the group information management becomes one really of information security. And there's a lot more to think about in this area, and this episode is not nearly long enough to cover that. Well, we've walked through the origin story of Attention Compass. I've talked about why Attention Compass is an attention management system. Attention is the application of our brain to some information set or to some environmental situation, and we glean information from that. So attention and information are tightly linked together. But I think we can manage our attention in ways that support the management of our information. My goal is to help as many people as I can. My goal is to help people reduce their stress. It's to help people become better at what they do. It's for people to have better careers with less stress. It's for people to be able to balance their work, which is important on certain aspects, with their life, which is important on others. It's intended to give us support for putting our attention where it needs to be. And make no mistake, your attention is under attack. It's not a level playing field. You can't sit there and do nothing and expect 5 years from now to really have the same autonomy over your attention that you do today. And I explain this in other episodes of the podcast here. But I wanted you to understand the background. I wanted you to understand the why behind Attention Compass. It really is something that I think is helpful to people. I think my biggest challenge, you may have heard people that have been in zero gravity. One of the first things that they say when they get back to regular gravity is, wow, you have no idea how heavy you are until you've been weightless. And what a pain it is to drag around, 100 and X pounds every day against the pull of the massive earth, and then talk about that. In similar ways, it's very difficult to understand the level of stress that most people are under until they're able to reduce it. and that lightness and that calmness and that confidence of having your stuff taken care of. And by stuff, I mean tasks, information, and relationships. That lightness of having this stuff taken care of is the primary outcome that I'm searching for when I teach people attention compass. Love for you to come along on the journey of getting better at what you do as a knowledge worker and getting better at having this calm productivity as part of your life. I'll leave it there for now. This is Larry Tribble, Ph.D. Thanks for taking some time to improve your task and information management on the Do Busy Right podcast. The show is dedicated to helping you think about how to get better at working. And we do this by improving your attention and your focus. I believe that your work is not just about your job, but about all the tasks that you do to turn yourself, your environment, and your relationships into what you want them to be. What we're really talking about here is the underpinnings of becoming who you want to be. The primary way I help people is through coaching the attention compass process. Attention compass is 4 workflows and a tool set that support our information, task, and attention management. I help people with big goals to build habits that put them in a position to achieve. We do this by eliminating wasted time and wasted attention. If you'd like to know more, you can find me on LinkedIn or go to dobusyright.com for more information. Have a good week, more effective and less exhausted. Do Busy Right.